All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our regularly scheduled council meeting of June the 24th. As we gather, we'd just like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and just honoring that their connections to these lands and adjoining waters continues to this day. Up first is approval of the agenda. Can I have a move and second? Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We have adoption of the minutes. The two sets, moved and seconded. Are there any changes or amendments, corrections to any of those? I'm looking online as well. I'm not seeing any. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. You probably have gathered, if you saw me looking up, we have Councillor Smart is joining us remotely. She's on a family vacation, but is still coming in to join us. We much appreciate that. And Councillor Appleton is traveling and unable to join us this evening. So we are down to 5 in the room and one out. My remarks today are, I'll just provide a little brief update to Council on some of the things that have happened over the last week. One was the regional transit meeting, which happens typically quarterly, took place. There's quite a few things that were in that meeting. First, a look at improving the intermunicipal island public transit corridors. So these are corridors between Victoria, Duncan, Nanaimo, which are interestingly sort of carved off to the individual, not to the BC Transit as a whole. The financial report for last year saw ridership higher than anticipated, which means a slightly less reduction in the reserves. It's running at drawing down reserves right now, but it happened a little bit slower than anticipated thanks to higher ridership. Pretty much back at 2019-2020 levels pre-pandemic. And the fare review approval went forward for 2025. It'll go to $3 a day for a single ride and $6 all day. So it'll be spring 2025. That's interesting, the first increase in fares in 15 years or so. So certainly not a large increase, but certainly probably overdue. And there was some support there for, again, asking the province to take the lead if they're interested in supporting the under 18 youth fares. Also, just want to acknowledge that the district has again been awarded the Canadian Award for Financial Reporting by the government. What's the title for Government Finance Officers Association, which is GFOA, for the annual financial report. This is an annual award that recognizes municipal governments throughout Canada who publish high-quality financial reports, and it represents a significant accomplishment for any government that gets it and for the management team that puts it all together. So, very pleased to get that again. And also just want to say my congratulations to the Oak Bay High graduation class of 2024, which had their graduation ceremony last week, attended by 313, I think, of the 330 or so graduates of the school. It's always great to see them all dressed up in robes. And also just looking forward, the annual questionnaire that's out that helps inform our priorities and budgeting process for next year is out right now and will be closing at the end of this month. I also was able to attend, we have an annual meeting between myself, the president of UVic, the mayors of Saanich and Victoria, so we had that meeting. And it's always just a really good way of kind of looking big picture at how we might work together to kind of move the region forward. And other things, coming up this Saturday is the first concert in the park for the year. It's unusually on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. So if you have a chance to visit that, it's going to be a great event. And the district is setting, and we've attended in partnership in previous years, but this will be the first year that the district is putting in a separate entry into the Pride Parade that's going to be happening on July 7th. So you'll see us all walking through there. At least everybody who's available will be down there walking. That concludes my comments for this morning. This is next is item number 5 on the agenda is a public comment and question period. So this is an opportunity for any member of the public who wishes to talk to council on items that are not on the agenda. Items on the agenda will have opportunities for public input when we discuss them, assuming they're items that can't have public input. But if anybody here wishes to talk to us on any other items that are not on the agenda tonight, so these are not specific to an item on the agenda, please come forward. We often have a person or two in the audience or online that wishes to speak. So yeah, I see someone interested. It's always intimidating to be the first one, but we try not to be too intimidating. The process is very simple. If you just have a seat and you can push the button on the microphone that turns it on, then everybody at home can hear us as well. You just have to state your name, your municipality of residence. You don't have to give your address, and then you have up to 3 minutes to address council. And just lower the microphone a bit towards you. You don't have to be too close. Perfect.
So, Honorable Mayor Murdoch and Council, I'm Sue Probilski, and I live in Oak Bay, and I'm speaking on Carnarvon Park. Honorable Mayor Murdoch and Council, Carnarvon Park is an important piece of the open space fabric in Oak Bay, providing recreation and leisure opportunities for a wide range of uses. This is the first sentence in the executive summary of the district's Carnarvon Park Master Plan in 2019. In 2024, Carnarvon Park remains one of the only open spaces for recreation and leisure in Oak Bay, but with the 5-story building, it would no longer remain an open area. It is essential Carnarvon remains an open space for recreation and leisure for present and future generations. Have you visited Carnarvon Park this spring? We live by the park, and it is a hub of activity on any night or weekend with baseball, tennis, children playing, riding bikes, lawn bowling, and pickleball. Henderson and Eastdown roads are lined with cars. Last night, it's a couple of nights ago now because I was working on this, people were just leaving the field at 9:20, and today, the next morning, the parking lot is nearly full, including a school bus, and people enjoying the water park, tennis courts, and pickleball courts. It is a busy community park, and housing in the park would be a huge strain on the facilities, roads, and park users. I will not elaborate on the many reasons why an apartment building should not be included in a refresh of the park, as I am sure you are aware of the many negative impacts on the community, such as infill housing increases, the need for our parks and open green spaces become more vital. Downsizing our park space while increasing our population is detrimental to the health of our community. Parks are public and not private facilities. There are safety and traffic concerns, alcohol and smoking in the park, garbage dumpsters in the park, noise. Will residents complain about the baseball announcing, pickleball, children playing, dogs barking, etc.? The impact on the tree canopy, the maintenance and management of it. Pedestrian and cycling safety, as it is a major route to many schools. The proximity of the baseball field to a 5-story building. And the impact of shadows and visibility within the park. These are just a few of the concerns, but my main concern is the loss of Oak Bay's community park, where children and adults can enjoy free recreation activities outside, using fields for pickup soccer, baseball, volleyball, and football games, throwing the frisbee, kite playing, kite flying, and bocce. People need green spaces to just relax and play without feeling like they are invading someone's privacy or feel that they are being watched. Outdoor tennis and pickleball courts are inviting, open, and free, so people of all ages and abilities can learn and try the sports. I question whether there would be a fee if indoor courts are the only option for playing pickleball. The park, in its current state, offers very little for youth ages 8 to 17.
Ms. Podolsky, I'd have to ask you just to wrap it up. We have a hard limit of 3 minutes per speaker, so if you could just wrap up your thoughts, please.
Basically, I'm trying to tell you that it doesn't have anything for those youth ages 8 to 17. No ball hockey, no basketball courts, and we need to keep those ages engaged in outdoor activities.
Thank you. Sorry, it is a limit of our public participation piece. You can also email us your thoughts. And,
I will just send this to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And for those interested in Carnarvon Park as a future piece, we are expecting, I think I heard last was probably coming in the fall. So the results of the survey and reports is that we have Director of Parks and Recreation here. Is that correct? So this fall we expect to have the results of all those pieces back along with the staff report. And that'll, again, when it comes back to council, will be an opportunity for public input at that time as well. So thank you for coming. Anybody else wish to come and speak to council? And any items not on the agenda this evening? We're really very friendly if anybody does want to come up. It's all good. I don't see anybody else. I don't see any hands online. So with that, we'll move on to item number 6 then, presentations. This is a results update on the Cool Kit program. We have Dr. Stephen Shepard here with us this evening. And you have a presentation. Tidley and Mr. Meikle, our Director of Community Parks, Recreation and Culture. Welcome. Do I hand this over to Mr. Meikle to introduce, or should I just hand this directly to Dr. Shepard? Well, I guess it's a presentation, so...
I'll do a quick introduction, Your Worship,
Thank
to Dr. Shepard. Many of you already know Dr. Shepard, but Dr. Shepard is a professor at Forest Research Management at the University of British Columbia, teaching in landscape and climate change planning, community engagement, and visualization. He has served as director of UBC's Urban Forest Program and directs the Collaborative for Advanced Landscape Planning, an interdisciplinary group which works with communities on developing climate change and energy solutions. And his research interests include engaging citizens in low-carbon resilient communities, sea level rise planning, renewable energy planning, and effects of the urban forest, and video games as an educational tool on climate change. And Dr. Shepard is here tonight to present year 3 of the Community Oak Bay Cool Kit evaluation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tidley. Much like our procedures bylaw limits open portion to 3 minutes, you're limited to 10 minutes, but we'll have time for questions afterwards as well. So with that, welcome.
Well, thank you very much to Mayor and Council and staff. So this is, we are now approaching the end of year 3 of the Oak Bay Cool Kit program. And I've prepared a few slides, or with my team, which I'd like to point out includes 3 interns that have been helping Parks Department in this last year 3, and I think helped quite a bit. This is the, if you like, the final year of UBC's involvement through the contract that thankfully Council supported. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. 4 things I'm just going to touch on. Brief recap. The accomplishments of the whole of the 3-year program, a few challenges, and some preliminary recommendations. So this is, if you like, a preview of what the final evaluation report, which is due the end of August. Next slide, please. So as you'll recall, the Climate Action Working Group, Community Climate Action Working Group, led to this program, had a whole series of goals that we've been trying to meet, and it includes sort of meeting some of the critical climate emergency targets that Council has established, notably the 40% tree canopy by 2045, and CRD's explicit target, which is the same as the UN's, of cutting carbon emissions in half, is sort of an aspirational goal if we're going to really address the climate emergency. So, next slide, please. So there's a lot in these slides, and the screens are quite small. Apologies for that. But essentially, there are 3 phases, and you can see the colors at the top. We started out in the year 1 with 4 workshops, including staff and the year 1 champions, as we call them. In year 2, we did the celebration event, which Council attended, along with, as with many other events, and managed to get some more champions added to the network. And then we did awards at that time. And in year 3, we've sort of changed process a little bit and did another tree celebration event, but also with leaflet and door-to-door that staff and the interns were helping with to reach people that weren't necessarily showing up at the events. We've gone on for tree planting, obviously, which we'll report on, and mapping, and we're getting into the final evaluation report phase. And all the little boxes in the middle there are sessions, evening sessions mostly, that the Cool Kit group and Chris particularly has helped organize that. But this was an idea that came from some of the champions themselves to bring people together on interesting topics. Next slide, please. So I'll make this, I won't go through all of this, but essentially what we've been able to do is build a network of champions. We've got over 60 of those now who have been formally trained through workshops in sort of the Cool Kit methods, but more broadly what climate action means in Oak Bay. And some of our champions, who are actually here, have said really nice things about it, of what it tries to do, which is it's brought together people who wouldn't otherwise realize that there were others like them who had those same interests, and provided some structure, a framework, if you like, for continuing climate action on a range of adaptation and mitigation issues. And also, obviously, a lot of staff outreach. Next slide, please. That's just a map that shows year 1, year 2, year 3, where the champions are. And I'm going to ask to go to the next slide, which has a composite map on the right. So that's where sort of clusters of people, groups, some of them are collective, some are individual, some are family-based. And you can see we're now across most of the neighborhoods in Oak Bay, and roughly about 20% of blocks have someone representing them that has either been trained or has been involved in the tree planting and those kinds of things. So somewhat engaged community. Next slide, please. And it's led to some climate action on the ground, as well as climate action plans. You may recall in the Cool Kit we had 5 big moves that reflect the range of policies that the council and the district has set forth, and sort of translating those into things like electric garden equipment, like solar panels, EV chargers, things like that, and of course tree planting. To date, we have had 183 Cool Kit trees, which include free trees for private land, as well as collaboration of local community members in the planting on the public boulevard. So this is a public-private combination all along. So it's quite a number of trees, as well as physical activities, pollinated corridors, meadows, and solar panels, and things like that, that champions and others have been doing. Next slide, please. These are just the maps of the tree locations, mostly in year 2 and year 3. And if we go to the next slide, please. What you'll see on the right is the composite of where those trees are, and the color codes are between the private and public. And as is common, there's many more public trees that can be planted readily anyway than private. It's a challenge to get enough private folks taking trees, even when they're free. But that's quite a significant number, and the chart shows how that number, which is the orange bars or the orange dots, has been growing year 3 because of methods that Chris and the team have been doing to reach people, including door-to-door and tree leaflets, which was originally an idea of one of the champions too. Next slide, please. So what kind of trees were planted? Well, the map on the right shows oak trees and others. It's Oak Bay, so oak trees are important. Something like 42% of the trees were planted were oaks. Most of those were Gary Oaks, natives. And the other ones tend to be a mixture, but many of those are smaller trees. The oaks are the big trees, are among the big trees that will give us the most benefit. And you will see that in many cases those are on public land rather than on private land. The chart shows that the response in different neighborhoods is quite different. And we've had great success at Harling Point with the sort of charrette type approach involving lots of households, over 100 households, in getting trees in the ground. Ron Carter's work in Falklands, you can see a big cluster of trees there. We're close to his expert knowledge with the community. And also in uplands, where Chris has been very active with folks who are quite keen in supporting major tree planting. But we have some work to do in other neighborhoods. Next slide, please. But we are in those neighborhoods, but just with smaller numbers so far. It's a work in progress. Just a shout out to Oak Bay and to the council and the staff. having some influence in other places, like the Cool Kit programs in Victoria. We've got international exposure at major North American conferences in US and Canada. Teaching the microcertificate as best practice. This is cutting-edge work that's being done here. Next slide, please. And just to get onto some of the challenges, a couple that I'll just pick out for now. Hopefully you'll have time to look at these a little later on. But we need better data on what residents are actually doing, particularly on the carbon footprint side. We need to sort of find ways to overcome some of the resistance that groups are finding within their neighborhoods, which is inevitable, but how do we help them get through it? And also within, that's sort of within the climate, the Champion Network, but outside that, there's important context. The district's obviously massively important, and the role there might be very helpful to involve experts in some of those pressure points with the community when there is some resistance. And also there are repercussions, obviously, to things like engineering and planning when communities have projects that they want to see developed or to take part in. And we'll come back to that. Bill 44 and the housing is obviously a major potential threat to the canopy. So what does that mean? What are our recommendations to deal with those? So,
Dr. Shepherd, we've got about a minute left for the presentation. We get to
I have
questions.
one slide, one major slide left, which is the next slide, please. That's it. So these are preliminary recommendations. We'd like to work on developing these further with the champions and with staff, and we invite input from council as well to finalize these. But these are some of the ideas: tabulating and mapping, doing a better job of recording some of the climate mitigations, carbon footprint reductions that champions and others in the neighborhoods have been doing. They're out there, but they're not well known and they're not very visible. Following up with the year 3 people who have taken on trees and trying to broaden that out into more engagement on the Cool Kit program, on other things besides trees. That's really one of the things that's unique about the Oak Bay project, using trees to bring people into a wider conversation about climate action and change that conversation. We want to expand that tree program for obvious reasons, and I think an important point is to increase the sort of proactive collaboration of not just the Parks Department, but all the departments in the district, so that when a project moves forward or when a housing development comes forward, all of those folks are able to interact and access this existing network of local champions as a way to sort of bring together the ideas rather than sort of bumping into them halfway through the process. So we think that would be strategically a helpful thing to do. Increasing staff bandwidth, that's always one of the limitations, you know about that. But we see some motion going on there, and also engaging some of the other community groups like neighborhood associations. I think I'll leave it there, but simply to say, while UBC may be ending its formal obligations here, obviously we think this is the beginning rather than the end of anything, and there's a lot more to be done and a lot of enthusiasm to support it so far. Thank you.
Very good, Dr. Shepherd. Thank you so much for the presentation. We do all have the full presentation here, so the lines that you skipped over, we have all had a chance to read. I give a chance for members of the council for questions. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much. Thanks very much for your presentation and for everything that you've been doing around this initiative. You had residential carbon, I think this is probably for staff, the information on residents' carbon footprint. I know we can calculate the district's carbon footprint, but as far as the residential carbon footprint side, how would we go about doing that? I'm not sure if Mr. Idlay might know the answer to that.
It may actually be a Mr. Bowl question, since we're looking at having a climate coordinator in the Building and Planning Department. Mr. Bowl, do you have an answer, or if not, I can give it over to Parks and Rec.
Mr. Green knows more about this than I have readily available, so let's go with him. Thank you.
Obviously, we get, the GHG emissions, we have an inventory that the CID produces for each of the municipalities, and we also have to report out on our GHG emissions at both the community and corporate level through our through the LG CAP funding that we received last year, and we're just in the process of filling in that questionnaire that needs to be due back with the province by the end of July. So we may be able to report back at a later date on what those emissions are once we have further information. And we are in the process of obviously trying to recruit a senior planner for climate action that would also be keeping abreast and keeping on top of those types of issues in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite.
So that doesn't necessarily take into account residents, though. That's really more for the district, correct?
Well, it's both really, isn't it? Yeah.
I guess community emissions are emissions produced by our residents, and so we use some assumptions in relation to how that actual inventory is developed, but it is basically residents are the community emissions, and corporate emissions are emissions produced by the district itself.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And one other question, and this probably will go to staff. Do we have dollars in the budget to continue a program like this? And if yes, do we know how much we would need to continue this program for like another year or another 2 years?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Braithwaite. We have targeted funding allocated in the budget for tree planting, for example, those more activity focused. We're in some current discussions about what that'll look like for next year's budget presentation of continuing this program. So.
And then just lastly, I know that Dr. Shepherd has brought a lot to this program, but I think that Mr. Hidlay definitely needs a lot of accolades for continuing this program along. I think that it wouldn't be at the level that it's at right now without you, Mr. Hidlay. So thank you very much for everything that you do. And I know there's a lot of other staff that help as well, but you always deflect that. And I think that you need to take some of the kudos as well for this program. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Smart. Oh, if you just unmute your microphone, you're still muted on our end. There we go.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciated the thoroughness of it, and also specifically the recommendations going forward. And the one recommendation I just wanted to ask a couple questions on was the collecting data and measuring success so that we can continue to take forward helpful information from our community. And my question is with regards to like sort of two potential areas that I could imagine staff might put their focus with regards to data. One being incorporating some questions into our annual survey that might collect information from like a broader community versus us maybe investing in something like Saanach's carbon calculator, but from an Oak Bay specific point of view that would measure individuals' efforts and motivate them individually. I just wondered between those two approaches if one of those would be encouraged more than another, or if you could just elaborate on what the most successful way of measuring data is from your perspective, probably to Dr. Shepherd or anyone that wants to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Dr. Shepherd, I think that's
I'm
appropriate
happy
for you.
to answer it, although I suspect there are others here who could also contribute a lot to that question. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think the idea of putting questions into an annual survey has some merit because it puts the question out there and helps get people thinking about it. And so I suspect some of those people might well be either invited into a program like the Cool Kid or whatever it grows into, or actually start providing some of that sort of bottom-up information. So I think that has multiple values because it's helping communicate, oh, this is the conversation we need to have, we need to start doing this. The calculator approach, as you may remember, we tried that in year one, and we got some good results, but some limited results, and they were quite low carbon footprints. And so I don't think it's reflective of the wider community. And what we found was it takes quite a lot of sustained effort to take groups and people generally through a personal calculation. It's fussy, it's complicated a little bit. It's not that complicated, but I think it's a great approach. It's the ideal approach. You get that bottom-up data. But it takes quite a lot of effort, and I think that's the drawback with that one. We thought it might be simpler than it actually was. But having said that, I think there are a number of ways to get this bottom-up data to complement the modeling and the inventory that every municipality does to calculate or estimate the community emissions. And again, part of that, I think, is this idea of sort of identifying demonstration projects or model concrete examples or, classic places or homes or champions who are modeling the behaviors or modeling the improvements. And we have quite a few of those already, and we could probably find more. And I think that would help complement the top-down numbers, which I think, you would be much more expert in than I am in terms of the modeling. But I think there's benefits to both, and finding some way to combine those efficiently is, I think, somewhere we'd like to explore a little bit in the evaluation report, and would love to, happy to talk with the folks who have their hands on the community-wide data as well.
Thank you, Dr. Shepherd. Councillor Smart?
Well, thank you. Through you, Mayor, just one more follow-up question, and that's with regards to rain gardens. There was so much interest in the Cool Kit program from residents in potentially installing rain gardens on their property and improving the stormwater management. And I wondered, with the model of the City of Victoria's programs, where I believe they might even have some financial incentive around installing rain gardens on your property to help with overall flooding issues, which we know are prevalent in Oak Bay. I wondered, would your through you, Mayor, to staff, would the Cool Kit report potentially address how the district could move forward with any way of supporting residents with installing rain gardens on their property?
Dr. Shepherd, is that part of the expected report coming back?
I think the issue of rain gardens and stormwater management is obviously an important, critical one. We haven't seen a lot of focus on it. There was a lot of interest, I think, early on. A lot of the available resources have gone into, probably the priority of trees and that aspects of green infrastructure. So I think there is more that could and should be done with that. The report can certainly address that, and I do think that there are some good incentives in Victoria. I'm not sure I'm completely up to date on that, but I think that is a really good suggestion to make that one of the sort of priorities that appeal to people in Oak Bay, and which is going to be needed. So I think we will need to address it at some level. The depth of which level, I'm not sure, but I think anything that is attractive and would help is well worth including. So yes, we will at least address it.
Thank you, Dr. Shepherd. Thank you, Councillor Smart. Councillor Green?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Dr. Shepherd and to Mr. Hidley and Mr. Meikle. I really appreciate everything that's gone into this program. It was a huge effort. It's had some great success. Just a couple of questions. One on capacity and mentorship post UBC involvement. So what are the implications practically on the ground, Dr. Shepherd, if UBC is no longer involved, and you mentioned they were ending their involvement shortly? Because I think the whole idea, I think that what was most attractive about this program was that we were building some capacity at the neighborhood level. And my concern now is the capacity of our staff to continue the program without the involvement of a third party. So I'm just wondering if we have to prepare something to continue that momentum and identify what that might be. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. We've talked a lot about that. And it is a concern. At the same time, the goal always was to build capacity, build some sort of ongoing structure, and also to bring in and rely, in part at least, on community-based organizations. I don't think the district can do this on its own, even if staff bandwidth and capacity wasn't limited, which it's always going to be in some way. Expanding that capacity is obviously great if it can be done. There's always more that could and should be done, but I think that there are a couple of specific answers. One is, I think we've already seen, and Chris, you can inform this or correct me if I get it wrong. We've seen a number of things that are already sort of self-running, and that's a combination of what primarily the Parks Department and Chris himself, as well as some of our leading champions in things like the evening sessions, the workshops, and there's going to be a big one next weekend with Brian Minter, but some of the other ones have been very well attended, brought people in, and these things are, UBC really hasn't been involved in that particularly. We've sat in and helped here and there, but that came from the program, didn't come from UBC, and it's been sustained by Chris and the larger team. So I think that's a good example, and it's an ongoing thing that I hope continues, and it's been highly productive, really. I think there's also just demonstrated interest and enthusiasm of the Champion Network. I think that's going to continue, but I think it will always need sort of some support and seeing other people being engaged. And I think the biggest opportunity is to bring in the neighborhood associations and potentially schools and probably other groups as well, that we've really not been super successful at bringing in as deeply as perhaps we'd hoped. You sort of have to decide, do you focus on the things you can, like getting more trees in the ground or more private tree planters and these evening sessions, or do you go to the schools and learn? If we can find ways to do that, to bring together a bit of a sort of a consortium of community groups so that people are hearing the same message from multiple sources and everyone's sort of taking some piece of the puzzle, if we could work that out, I think that would be much better than a UBC. Again, we'll try and provide a little bit of a roadmap in the evaluation report, at least some ideas on how that might
Thank you,
go
Dr.
forward.
Shepherd.
Thank you.
Don't see any, Councillor Watson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, I think this is maybe just starting with Dr. Shepherd. Thank you for coming. It's wonderful to see 3 years worth of work in review here. I just had one question. You said something in passing about, these weren't quite your words, but resistance or hesitancy perhaps for people to accept free trees on private property. There were words to maybe that effect. And I'm just wondering going forward if you have any suggestions, or you with our parks colleagues have any suggestions about overcoming that. And because it's such a critical element of us addressing or mitigating climate change. And I guess a subsequent query about that is, does it really matter whether they're on private versus public property? I understand community engagement around private property, but do we have enough space to in fact address the benefit that we would get from more tree canopy just using public land? So it's kind of a double-barreled question there.
No, and
Thank you,
so,
Councillor Watson.
and Chris will have probably harder numbers than I can quickly think of on these kinds of things, so I'll also defer to you, but I can take a first stab if you like. Actually, I'm going to switch the order if that's okay. I think it's supremely important. I think the private land, I don't think any municipality can meet its targets if it doesn't have a strong canopy, in most cases, expansion program on private land. It just won't happen. It just isn't enough public land to cram the trees into. And you need the cooling and the stormwater benefits and the myriad other benefits where people live, on the block, on their street, in their neighborhoods, right? Can't just be all on, equivalent of Stanley Park or Uplands or those kinds of things. So I think it's essential, and it's also essential that we reach those folks so that they are making those changes in their own sort of lifestyle and how they steward the land, steward the trees, this kind of thing, so that we're conserving carbon and we're dealing with climate proofing their neighborhoods. In terms of how we might do it and overcoming resistance, there are multiple layers of that. So I think Chris could tell you, from having knocked on many doors in particularly some of those low canopy neighborhoods on the west side, so from Carnarvon Park, Henderson, that side where they tend to have smaller trees and less of the Gary Oaks and this kind of thing. That's perhaps the priority. And there's generally a real interest from people in having more trees. The issue is they're much more comfortable. It's very easy for them to say, yeah, happy to have them on the boulevard. Don't really want them on the property necessarily. Some people will and do, and we've seen that, and so we can convince people of that. But there are a lot of sometimes misconceptions about the size, the messiness. Those are issues that people hear all the time, and you're probably no strangers to these things. But they're not necessarily considering what the direct benefits are to themselves in terms of shade or just neighborhood cooling, stormwater reduction, air pollution, goes on and on and on. Mental health, physical health. They're not that aware of that, and so part of it is an education thing, but it's also part of seeing other people doing it. And so if we were to have a well understood target, and that you had a sort of a target by neighborhood perhaps, say, well, our neighborhood is supposed to have, X hundred trees over the next 5 or 10 years, and Chris has all those numbers. But we're all in it together, so we need to do that. So that could include private, and should and would need to include private trees. And the second layer to it is that many people would be willing to do it, but they aren't very proactive about it. And so Chris or somebody has to go back out and sort of hammer on the door 3 times, or, it needs a larger momentum to get people to do what they actually say, oh yeah, I would actually do that, but they don't. And then there are people who just don't want trees at all, and there are some of them, but talking to some of the interns that were out in the field with Chris, they feel the majority are inclined, but they need some support and some guidance and a bit of encouragement.
Great, thank you very much for that. Satisfactory, okay, good. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just to follow up to the last question, where we seek assistance from private homeowners to do tree planting, even if they're willing to, quite often they don't have the expertise to know what kind of tree and is it in the right place, and they rely on landscape companies or whatever contractors will do the work. And given the new provincial housing targets, I'm just wondering what type of knowledge is required to integrate the planning so that if trees are planted, they are at a reduced risk of being eliminated in the not too distant future. So how do you accommodate both the uptake in the tree canopy and allowing for potential infill in a community? Just wondering if there's any strategies for managing that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Dr. Shepherd, I'm going to ask if we just keep the questions and the replies shorter. We're half an hour in, we have a lot of business to get to, so I don't want to cut you off, but we have to.
Yeah. I think I'll give you 2 partial answers to that, if I may. One is, I think that what the team has been doing is helping build that capacity. When, in other words, this is a collaborative project. You get a free tree, they help you with the species selection, they talk about where the location is, and they give advice on how to keep that tree alive and those kinds of things. So I think by combining it with the public planting, you can efficiently build some of that capacity and build some of that knowledge and hopefully have people be able to check back later on and come and see how it's doing and give them further advice. That's one way to do it, and we've seen some of that. The other thing I think is on the infill question. I think that's a much bigger and more difficult question. We do know that if trees are if they're going to excavate for a basement, for example, they can take a huge amount of area just to accommodate the excavation. And so placing trees near the boundaries, further set back away from it, there are ways to do that. But I think a lot of that has to be thought through in terms of the infill guidelines.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Let's see any other hands. I have a question that's really not a question, more just a request. I hope in the report, is it possible to include some, perhaps some guidelines of how we might engage with the University of Victoria or Camosun College? I don't think they have a resource management, forest resource management team in the same way that UBC does, but they may have other programs that might make sense for us to partner with. And I think any insight you can give us as to how we might make it compelling for them to partner and find partnerships would be very helpful, I think, because it's a world you understand, that your insight would be very helpful. And other than that, I just wanted to basically just say thank you. I actually do want to recognize council who's actually showed up at many of those events and so forth.
Yes.
I think it really shows the passion that the council has for a lot of these initiatives. Many of the volunteers that also participated. That includes neighborhood groups and other sort of ad hoc pieces, that new groups that have formed together out of buildings or other pieces that have been really interesting to see. But really, and also just want to finish with the Parks and Rec and Culture staff, Councillor Braithwaite mentioned, but particularly Mr. Hidley, who has been so instrumental in, as you've heard in the presentation tonight, and sort of spearheading this, and not just as a job, but as a champion for the outcomes and building an urban forest in Oak Bay. So our appreciation, Mr. Hidley, and to all of the staff that work with you on this. So thank you. With that, I think we will call this portion of the meeting concluded. Thank you very much, Dr. Shepard. I think we could have spent probably hours just talking about that, so we need a different forum. Item number 7 is reports and memorandums. We have here a municipal consent of CRD bylaw. I have, I guess Ms. Lachance is here to introduce this item, and if there's any questions, we have members both from the CRD and from the Royal McPherson Theatre Society here that are also available to answer questions. Ms. Lachance.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I will provide a brief presentation to the report, but I did want to point out those that are in the audience joining us for this item. So it's Chris Gilpin, who's the Manager of Arts and Culture with the Capital Regional District. And then just beside is Franz Lervas, the Executive Director for the Royal McPherson Theatre Society. This report introduces an amending bylaw, which the CRD is seeking Oak Bay Council consent on. On July 12, 2023, the CRD Board approved first, second, and third readings of the amending bylaw 4560. As a reminder, the bylaw relates to the CRD service which provides a contribution to the Royal Theatre each year and which is paid for by the District of Saanich, the District of Oak Bay, and the City of Victoria. Of note is that the funding provided to the Society is only a portion of the annual costs to operate and maintain the theatre. Based on the 2023 AGM year-end results, for context, greater than 90% of the $3.8 million in revenue for the Royal was funded from fees earned from the theatre operations. In order for the CRD to pass the amending bylaw, 2/3 of participants are required to consent. On November 6, 2023, the District of Saanich Council provided unanimous approval, and the City of Victoria is yet to consider the item. For Council's reference, select historical information on this service has been included in the report, as well as information on a similar process undertaken in 2019-2020, which did not move forward. The bylaw can be found on pages 11 to 13. Sorry, Mayor and Council, there's a correction from the report that references page 46 to 48. So it'll be page 11 and 13 you're looking for. To this end, so the proposed changes are to change the maximum requisition to the greater of 580,000 or the equivalent rate per thousand in assessed value, update the apportionment method to 50% population and 50% converted land values for Oak Bay, away from the intermunicipal formula of property values. and as well, remove restrictions on specified amounts for allocation to operating and capital. There are no amendments being proposed to the existing governance structure, which includes oversight by the CRD Board and Royal McPherson Theatre Society Advisory Committee. Both bodies have district elected officials as members. The impact of the change in the maximum requisition as modeled for this bylaw change could potentially have up to approximately a $1,900 impact to Oak Bay if approved in 2025 CRD annual financial planning process. In other words, it would need to be requested. The change in the cost share formula, if approved, was estimated during modeling to possibly impact up to an increase of 1% in the district cost share from 9.4% to 9.5%, approximately $456. This will be dependent on how assessments values change each year. Lastly, removal of the prescribed amounts to capital and operating will increase flexibility of the grant, but could result in less money directed to capital or to operating. As the district is an owner of the facility, this could result in greater capital or operating obligations. However, the existing governance model and budget approval process in place, the amounts contributed to operating capital are still subject to CRD guidelines, which prioritize asset management and maintaining service capacity of the theatre. The recommendation is that the report be received and that Council consider giving consent to CRD bylaw number 4560, Royal Theatre Local Service Establishment bylaw number 1, 1998, amendment bylaw number 1, 2023. With my introduction complete, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chance. I might, just as one of the people sitting on the CRD board who voted in favor of this, moving it to this end of the process, and as chair of the CRD's Royal McPherson Theatre Society Advisory Committee, which does the analysis of the financial ask, I can say that it was well supported by both those bodies at the regional level, primarily just as a mechanism to provide some flexibility of funding. The current model is essentially locked into a single number and has been for decades, which of course effectively reduces the amount of payment. But more importantly, as needs change and innovations happen, there's no mechanism by which to respond either to decrease need or to increase need under the old model. This is quite constrained in the sense that it's essentially locked in where it is now, only able to increase at the amount of the growth of the region. So it's tied to that. And I guess the other thing I would just comment, it's a bit tangential to the ask, but probably somewhat important, is that the CRD also recently approved the reconstitution of the Regional Performing Arts Working Group, which will be looking at management of performing arts facilities in the region. Part of that discussion will be, of course, how to finance that, how to bring other partners into that model. And so having more flexibility in the financing model allows for this, the opportunity for cost sharing and additional investment. Without that, with the current model, it doesn't really work. It's kind of stuck in the current situation. So I think that probably helps provide a little bit of political context to the financial that was so ably presented. Are there any questions? Councillor Braithwaite and Patterson.
Thanks so much, Maria. So just going on what you had said, the question that I think would come from that would be if the bylaws are if the bylaws are amended for the Royal and the McPherson, does it make it easier for non-participating municipalities to join the other to join the two services, thus spreading the cost among the municipalities?
Mr. Chance, do you wish to answer that?
Yeah, and I will just only comment briefly, I think, because probably a better question for CRD, who's involved in developing those bylaws. But with respect to this change, it's very much primarily for the existing participants. That said, as we modernize bylaws, they can better demonstrate what investment at the CRD shared table looks like, supporting future development of bylaws. Through you, Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if we need to direct that to the CRD.
Sorry,
or,
Mr. Gilpin, do you wish to come forward and just answer that?
Thank you. My name is Chris Gilpin. I'm the manager of arts and culture at the Capital Regional District. Happy to be here. Through the worship to the council, thank you for the question. Yes, the CFO got it absolutely correct. This really is a matter of being able to provide flexibility to meet community needs and respond to innovations. However, I will also say that the modernization of these bylaws will make it much easier for the CRD to provide cost estimates to potential new partners to the service. And by giving them a cost estimate, this really allows people to do, and by which I mean municipalities, to do a cost-benefit analysis about whether or not to join the service. So to your question, yes, it will in the long term make it easier for other municipalities to evaluate whether or not to join both the Royal Theatre Service or the McPherson Playhouse Service.
Through you, Mayor. And then I know that Ms. LaChance said that the City of Victoria has not voted on this yet. And I think one of the reasons, and perhaps you can answer this, Mr. Gilpin, is that because Oak Bay hasn't dealt with it yet, and the City of Victoria wanted to be last because they're involved in both the McPherson and the Royal. And I believe that that's the reason that they haven't dealt with it yet. So just to maybe confirm that.
Mr. Gilpin or Ms. LaChance, I think I'll give that to you. If you
Yeah,
can answer
and
it.
I can't comment on that as fact myself, but I do know that they're yet to consider it. So I would suspect they're waiting for us. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to whoever can best answer this question. One of the intents is to increase flexibility in how funds are allocated between operational and capital funding, which may be of some concerns. So I'm just wondering how the existing way of allocating those funds is constrained by the existing methodology, and in what way giving greater flexibility will improve the future planning for sustainability for the theaters.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have a feeling I should maybe give this one to
I'll
Mr.
start.
Okay, go ahead.
But my colleague from CRD can always jump in. It's like old times, right? So currently the bylaw for the Royal Theatre sets out a prescribed amount, $100,000 for operating and $480,000 for capital. Not every year, as we experience here in the district, do we need to invest the same amount every single year in capital perpetually. Oftentimes there's some needs in operating that maybe outweigh the investment, and we'll be saving for capital over time. So it does increase the flexibility to be able to, when you remove those prescribed amounts, be able to go where the need is between operating and capital. And maybe I'll pass over to Chris.
Mr. Gilpin?
Through the worship to the council, that's exactly it. Right now, it's prescribed in the bylaw, and there's zero flexibility. There's nil. The flexibility is nil currently. What this allows is that through the process of the Royal and McPherson Theatre Society can bring forward to the Royal and McPherson Theatres Services Advisory Committee a request saying, we're looking forward to the next year. We have a slightly larger capital project coming up. We'd like to maybe do a slight relocation of the funds. I think the important thing to emphasize, though, is that asset management is still the priority, and taking care of the building is still the priority. We're not talking about a big shift at all in the ratio of operating versus capital, and it is still overseen by multiple committees, including the ones that I've just described, as well as the Finance Committee and eventually the CRD Board itself. So there's still many times when we look at this breakdown, we give chances for elected officials from Oak Bay to weigh in and say, no, we don't like this, or we do like this. But finally, there would be some flexibility to start having discussions about how best to allocate both operating and capital resources to meet the community need.
Thank you. And just for anybody wondering, the Royal McPherson Theatre Society Advisory Committee, which has got a great name, is a subset of 5 people. It's 1 representative from Oak Bay, 2 from Saanich, 2 from Victoria, and they're really looking at it from the ownership perspective to kind of consider the application from the Royal McPherson Theatre Society. That's the process. So in case anybody's wondering who's on that committee or what does it look like, that's what it is. So that's the sort of the municipal oversight that before it goes to the broader CRD and finance piece. Are there any other questions for staff? Don't see any, so I'm prepared to
Move receipt.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor of receipt of the report? Carried. Thank you.
And I'll move that the council give consent to CRD bylaw number 4560, Royal Theatre Local Service Area Establishment bylaw number 1, 1998, amendment bylaw number 1, 2023.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion? I just want to thank everybody here, Mr. Lirabas, Mr. Gilpin, for coming out and being prepared to answer questions on this. And we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So you have your 2/3. We'll see what City of Victoria does from this point forward. So well done. Have a good evening. Hope you weren't keeping you from the hockey game. I suspect we're going to have a motion arising at the end of the night that's going to automatically cancel council meetings. There's a Game 7 of this not Hockey Night in Canada. Moving on to item number 8.1, this is subject to public input. We have our 2023 annual report. I will hand this over to Ms. Plouffe, our Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. So tonight we have the annual report before council. The district has a legislated requirement to produce an annual report by June 30th of every year, and for it to be made available to the public for viewing and feedback. So the annual report before you is retrospective, covering the calendar year 2023 in terms of operations, and must also contain established priorities for the next year, 2024. This report was made public available on June 7th and advertised in the Oak Bay News. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions? Councillor Patterson? And I will give a chance, I'm seeing a lot of hands popping up, a chance for any members of the public who wish to talk to us about the annual report before I come back to the table for directions or further questions. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And this, our Director of Finance has just left, but that's all right. Hopefully other members of the staff that are here will be able to answer or respond to this. I noticed in the financial information, the district's obligation for the Neighborhood Learning Center, the rent is shown on page 88. That's been consistent since 2015 throughout all of the reports. But on page 89 of the report this year, there's a government transfer of $637,258 for the child care program. I am making the assumption that has to do with provincial funding for that program. And if that is in fact the case, I'm wondering how and when the district applies for those funds and what expenses qualify. So i.e., one is in the statement of financial information, but how does it flow through to the operational budget? And so perhaps staff can elaborate on
I think we have the right person in the room, actually. Mr. Meikle.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Patterson. That is part of the $10 a day childcare program. So we report out, monthly as well as an annual reporting cycle on our expenses. And so factoring in the $10 each family pays, and then what we submit to the provincial government is the expenses to run the program, and that's what you see coming back to us.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Just to follow up to that, please, Mayor, if I could. Yes, that good. At least I made the right assumption about that. And so, in fact, that demonstrates a considerable cash back to really families, to help families in this community with the daycare. So it doesn't improve the district's revenue necessarily, but it does flow through to the community, which is definitely a benefit. But for the figure that is in this report, do we understand what kind of capacity that generated that type of a grant? Is it based on capacity of the?
Sure, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Patterson. It is in a roundabout way related to capacity. So we submit our registration numbers, how many children are in the program, which of course is then tied to a very specific ratio set by community care and licensing requirements. So within that, then once we submit our expenses, which would include X number of staff to service X number of children, that's how that formula kind of plays out that way. So What is reimbursed to us is really the expense side of the equation. So really roughly a net zero approach to providing childcare services, so that again, as you say, families are paying much less than they were in the past. But that's the tie-in to capacity. If our, again, we've, as is well known, we've been experiencing staffing challenges there, which have limited some of our capacity, but it is based on our actual, what numbers we get in and how much staff we have. And we anticipate we will continue to strive to grow the capacity in the program through those hiring of staff. Once that goes, then we would resubmit. Again, we submit on a monthly basis to the province and would let them know, yeah, we've got now X number of children registered, it requires X number of staff, and is reflected in these expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you for that information. And I think, it really speaks to the benefit of this program in providing services to the families, and certainly shows why there will be angst if we have difficulty staffing or providing the capacity. But, I think that it's a fact that would otherwise go under the radar of just what a substantial benefit is having the center is to the district, and worth noting. So thanks for your work on that. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson, I have Councillor Watson, then Smart, and then Green.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to, I guess, maybe Ms. Plouffe initially, or maybe it's staff more generally. Thank you for another great annual report. I think it's very easy to digest, and I know it's required, but it's great that it is accessible information for the public, so thank you. I just have one question. I think we did talk about this last year, and I haven't gone back to see if I can find my notes, but it has to do with us operating units reporting either performance measures and or statistics. And I wondered, and it's a mixed thing because departments are doing different things. I understand that, but I wondered if we're anywhere closer or moving towards in the operating units an idea of actually using benchmark reporting, so that it's just not raw numbers about the number of things we did, but how that compares to some benchmark that we've set for ourselves, or the operating departments have set for themselves with respect to service levels. And that's just a broad question. Every department is doing different things. Those benchmarks clearly would be different, but I just wondered across the corporation where we might be in our thinking about that.
Ms. Plouffe, it's probably one where we would like to have the CAO Williams here to help chip in, but go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would have to have the CAO answer that question. I wasn't here for the conversation of the annual report last year. I'm not sure if that's something that has been considered or put on the radar, but it's definitely something that we can talk about.
I'll go over to Mr. Meikle. I do know there's been a considerable amount of work internally to develop, service levels and so forth, and benchmarking. So, Mr. Meikle, you may be able to speak to that in a bit more detail.
Thank you. I can speak a little more to Parks, Recreation, and Culture and that. So one of the benchmarks we use is an annual change. So last year's numbers, et cetera. So moving forward, that is for us considered one of the benchmarks, especially in numbers like participation rates, trees planted, some of those measures. But we would also use elements, so for Parks, Rec and Culture coming into a master plan process, we would look to have some advice provided, some recommendations provided through that process that will give us some of those other benchmarks that may be our benchmarks compared to even national standards or other districts of similar size, et cetera. So some of that work is continuing and ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smart and then Councillor Green.
Thank you. Through Mayor to staff, Councillor Watson already touched on the metrics, which I would just back up my interest in seeing those benchmarks and the sort of progress from year to year. But my question is, through Mayor to staff, is with regards to the archives. And I just wanted to note on page 27 under the archives program, school programs, history talks, special events, it was left blank for 2023. And I just wondered if there was an update to provide on that element of the archives program.
be over to Ms. Plouffe and the administrative group.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have an update for that this evening, but I will check with that. That number was supposed to be filled in before the report was finalized, so I can get back to council on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And then Councillor Green.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, thank you very much, Ms. Plouffe, for the report. And just a question, you referenced the public feedback and that this report was well advertised in early June. Do you have any summary of the feedback that we received? Any points that stand out from the public? I would be interested to know what their feedback was. If you could summarize. Thank you.
Ms. Plouffe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was not made aware of any feedback that was received.
My suspicion is that people are probably filling in the survey that's out right now.
Yeah,
Using that as a feedback tool.
Okay. That's unfortunate. I hope we can promote further participation in our next annual report. Thank you.
Thank you. I do know I saw at least one person coming in to pick up a hard copy of it to read through it, so I know it has had some people read it. Any members of the public wish to come and address council before we come back specifically to the annual report? Nope, nobody online I don't see, so with that, I'll come back to this table. I guess I'll just make a brief comment in terms of these pieces. I do appreciate the report, and people may not remember what this looked like a few years ago, but it was a much less readable document, much harder for a layperson to understand what was happening. So I do appreciate the work that's on there. I think as we've now implemented benchmarks, and we've had, I think, about 3 or 4 years of some of those pieces, I guess there's, the comment made about are there benchmarks that we should be comparing those to is probably a good question to take back for next year. And I would also consider, are we yet at a point where we can start looking at average, like 5 or 10 year averages? I don't think we can do, I know we can't do 10, we haven't been collecting the data for that long, but we may be almost at a position of being able to provide some of those so that it's not just the last year over year, but provide some trending information as well. I think that would be quite helpful when just glancing at some of these numbers. Councillor Patterson, you had a hand up.
Yes, I did. I just wanted to mention one other thing. Certainly, it was a reminder of have we had any questions from the public, and I did tell people if they wanted to know about the emergency volunteer program that the annual report did in fact report on those numbers. But I now note that there were no stats published last year or this year, that the 2021 report was the last that those stats were published. So that's a change, and I don't know that there's anyone here that can explain that, but sometimes it's harder to identify things that just don't make it in again as compared to what is there. So I just offer that for comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And certainly I think those are, you can fire off an email to staff and just sort of understand where those stats went. It may have dropped off when we didn't have anybody around during COVID or something that could have triggered that, but certainly a question worth asking. Councillor Braithwaite?
Move receipt.
Oh, moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. We don't usually debate receipt of reports, so all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And I'll move that the District of Oak Bay's 2023 annual report be approved.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you. And thank you to all the staff that worked so hard to put that all together. It is a very good snapshot. I was just offloading previous years, previous decade or so of annual reports, and it's interesting to see how they've scaled in size and content over the years. Item number 9.1, which is our zoning amendment bylaw 4871 for infill housing. Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mayor. With this bylaw and the next one, we have most of our infill housing program in front of you today, and it follows up on the guiding principles that were set back then. The report itself is really short. We caught a couple of more detailed matters that we looked over with several pairs of eyes and made some changes. We are available here to discuss that further with you, but I didn't want to presume that we needed to discuss those matters in detail, but if there's any questions, Mr. Green, Ms. Vermel online, and myself are available to further discuss this with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we get to, well, just go to any questions that people may have. Yeah, Councillor Watson, and then Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. I realize this is late in the day and it's not going to change anything, but I realize this is so technical, and I realize that I did not. I know you're proposing, you're recommending a new definition for density. What could you? I saw the definition in the bylaw for unit ratio, but and that's not changing. But what is it? Like it says the means the expressed unit area of land required for each dwelling unit. Does that mean the amount of surface area if the unit was all spread out in the ground, or what does that actually mean in the context of multiple units on a lot?
Mr. Bull, unit ratio.
Maybe for clarification, is that specifically the unit ratio term you're referring to?
Just that term, it's one of the things that's included in the definition of density, FAR, and it's specifically mentioned. So I looked up in the bylaw what unit ratio is defined as, but I still don't understand what that means.
Mr. Bull.
I think it does ring a bell for Mr. Green, so do you need some time? We need some time to get back to you on that, because that wasn't specifically reviewed for infill housing.
Yeah, so I believe it relates to some of the multifamily zones, and so unit ratio means the expressed unit area of land required for each dwelling unit. And so that is specifically, the unit ratio is specifically only referenced in the multifamily zones.
So please, if you could explain what's the numerator and what's the denominator to get the ratio?
So let me just, can I just come back to you? I need to look at some of the multifamily zones and see what the unit is expressed as, and then I can come back to you.
And then just so that you could also confirm that it actually then in effect would not apply in the context of what is in a way going to become multi-unit residential lots.
Mr. Green?
Well, it won't apply to any of the, essentially the restrictive zones that we've amended. Any of the R zones, well, were previously the RS zones. It only applies to some of the 3-story, 4-story multifamily zones that we currently have that had to be, there were some still amendments to those multifamily zones because of they also had single-family dwelling units as a permitted use in those zones. So we have made some amendments to the multifamily zones. It's just the unit ratio, we're not touching that. It's essentially already in those multifamily zones and is still referenced in the definition of density and was previously referenced in that definition of density in those multifamily zones.
Councillor Watson, do you need him to keep looking it up, or is that satisfactory?
I am. You don't. We can do this offline, but I am still curious to know what the numerator and the denominator are. What would that mean in a multi-family site? Thank you. Doesn't have to happen now.
So we'll allow that to just be circulated by email. I think it's a question that council is probably generally interested in. So, sorry, Councillor Watson, then Smart, and then Councillor Smart. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Really exciting that we're at this stage. Want to thank staff for going through all these details in such a small amount of time. I had 3 questions I was just hoping to go over today, understanding that we are going ahead with the timeline at hand, but maybe these can be helpful for as we move ahead. My one question was with regards to specifically to the new items brought up in the report with the transfer of lot coverage for garages to park cars in the principal residence. And I'm just wondering, are we not with this clause incentivizing building larger structures for automobiles over dwelling space for people by allowing a larger house for cars? Being that we are in this housing crisis, could this shift of lot coverage from the accessory building to the principal residence also be allowed for additional dwelling space, in a sense adding an extra clause as we have for the parking of automobiles, increasing the lot coverage?
Mr. Bull?
Thank you. I'll I'll have an answer, and maybe Mr. Green will jump in as well. Well, first off, I think it sounds a lot with the attention to the garage and parking facilities. It seems maybe to be incentivizing that, but it's not quite that, because it's a transfer, so it's more of a form and character measure that seeks to give a little bit of an incentive to then move the garage, or it could be an attached garage or a detached garage, but move it to the back of the front facade of the house. What we also know from practice is that this clause is actually not hardly ever used. The more commonly used is a different one that deals in RS 4 and 5, if actually with floor area ratio. So yeah, but it is what it is. We left it in. We looked at it as well, but we left it in because it's an existing tool. It does not stand in the way of infill housing, we believe. It does give actually the starting point of a possible mechanism we could maybe look at over the summer, and instead of the focus on garages, maybe it could have a look at, it could be a part of our form and character regulation. The second thing I wanted to say about this was, in the context of, is there an option to give more floor area for residential use? That's hard to think how that would be implemented, because quite right now we have the tiered approach for FAR already. FAR is a little bit indifferent about where in the building it is, or which building, because it could be principal building, most of the floor area will go there, but we do have the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, which is a detached other dwelling. It could go there as well, and we leave it quite open where that is, as long as the overall other site conditions are met. But yeah, this is one of the clauses. We think that it's a starting point for form and character mechanisms that we need to look at over the summer anyway. So for now, we've updated it to make sure it could remain. I hope that clarifies this. Thank you.
Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. My second question through you, Mayor, to staff is with regards to the definition of accessory dwelling unit, looking at how it allows for a dwelling unit to be above a garage. But we've gone ahead with an accessory dwelling unit that must be, I believe, 1.5 meters from the property line. I'm just wondering if staff has any awareness to date of how many garages, actually could be reused if they're 1.5 meters from the property line, and if this percentage is extremely low of garages located that far that could have reuse. Is that something that staff would potentially already be bringing back to council in our next steps? Or is that something that council would need to put a motion forward to look at the potential reuse of garages?
Go to Mr. Green. Do we have the data in terms of how many existing garages are closer than 1.5 meters?
Through the chair, we don't have that data per se, but I guess we do know from just anecdotal evidence that historically accessory buildings have been built up to the 0.6 metre setback, and therefore you would need to have a variance to convert an accessory building into an accessory dwelling unit. And I guess it should be, there may be some new occasions or some more recent accessory buildings where it may be feasible to convert an accessory building into an accessory dwelling unit, but those more historic garages or older garages, to bring those up to code, in particular in terms of window fenestration details, energy efficiency, seismic upgrades, it may not be feasible to simply convert a accessory building into an accessory dwelling unit without significant expense, and probably in a lot of cases probably cheaper to demolish that accessory building and start afresh to ensure compliance with BC Building Code. That being said, we also did engage our fire department in relation to these amendments, and the fire department were, at this point in time, wanted to retain a 1.5 metre setback for accessory dwelling units, but we did, with acknowledgement that we would revisit that setback requirement with them in due course to see if there was a way of reducing that in due course. But the fire department were concerned that it's not necessarily the materials of the building, it's what people put inside those buildings that sometimes creates that fire risk, and where they were concerned about reducing of that setback without some further analysis taking place.
Thank you. I think you answered the next logical question of that, which is what's the process? Would be a variance process should someone want to do that. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that explanation. I just wanted to get ahead of, potentially, and I'm not sure how many beautiful garages and carriage houses might get torn down. And obviously the building code would allow for buildings to be closer. So I appreciate the context there. My last question is with regards to, through you, Mayor, to staff. I do have some concerns that these bylaw amendments to date don't yet have enough flexibility in which to allow the average homeowner in RS4 and RS5 lots to easily renovate their property to provide more housing units. And I'm wondering when staff will be bringing additional infill housing considerations to council, with regards particularly to townhouses, corner lots, laneways. There's been a lot of comments along the way about this is just stage one of our infill housing program. So could you possibly just touch on whether or not the next step will be more reactionary based on problems that arise from applications that staff receive, or when the next touch point is with the community and where we go from here?
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Mr. Bull.
Yeah, thank you. Let me see. The R4 and R5 zones do have the most the tiered approach in the FAR. So there's the different FAR tiers there. Those zones also have the additional lot coverage for ADUs for existing buildings if you retain an existing home. So there's some options there. How that all plays out. At this point, we're going to look at that, monitor it. I think in terms of next touch point, this summer's work is focusing on other matters around infill housing and not so much, I think, these kind of topics as floor area ratio and types, because they're wide open, right? It could be any type of housing right now on all these lots, and that extends to a fourplex or a triplex. But there is also some monitoring coming out later this year. Mr. Green can provide some more information on that.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Welcome, Mr. Green.
Yes, probably three things probably to mention here. Obviously, I think at the June 3rd meeting, Council did direct us to report back by the end of the year or towards the end of the year on progress to date, so that Council could understand some of what the uptake had been, and so that should also help to give us a sense of reflection as to whether there is some changes that may need to be tweaked, given how we start to implement these new regulations. Secondly, we do have our, at the end of October, we'll need to report to Council on the full year housing target order that will be due by Council on October 28th. We'll probably need to bring a report to Council on the housing target order and the number of units that are in the pipeline. Should also give us an indication of whether we need to sort of be more flexible or make some further changes to the regulations. And then, thirdly, there was something else I was going to mention that's just lost from my mind in terms of there was something else that Council has previously directed us to draft an amendment bylaw to the Development Applications Procedure bylaw to delegate minor DVPs to staff, and so it's likely, hopefully in July or September, we'll bring a report to Council on delegation of minor DVPs, so that also may be, whilst may not necessarily change the regulations, it might give an easier process for those applicants that have a good rationale to seek a variance to some things for a certain type of development. May also help to streamline the process from having to go through a council process. So that was probably what I just wanted to mention.
Thank you for that. Can I just follow up on Councillor Smart's specific question around some of the potential other housing forms, so something specific for, say, corner lots or allowances for townhouses, those sorts of the things that we were going to work on under the old infill housing program that kind of got essentially set aside. We're here. Do we have any sense of where that's coming in as we're doing the work you've mentioned? And there's always the village area plan, these other pieces. Do we have a sense of other, I guess I'll call it other infill and where that might come in. Through you, through myself to Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mayor. Within the current infill program, there will be options for townhouses, but it's up to 4 units, of course, because of the limitations of the infill housing program. But next year, as part of the mandatory update to OCP and zoning bylaw based on housing needs reports, that's where we're going to look at multifamily, and that's where these additional housing options that may be an add-on to infill housing, or maybe there are in a new multifamily designations or an update to that part of the land use framework next year. It can be reviewed there. I think that would be the first available opportunity. We are also bringing back later this year a report to you about the housing action housing action program, and the status of that and where we are, and that also gives council an opportunity to maybe specify specific follow-up, because there are a number of elements from the infill housing strategy that were parked for future consideration, but that future consideration comes up through the OCP review next year.
Thank you for that. Anything else, Councillor Smart? No. Okay. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the work done on this. I must admit, I did not read every change throughout that document. I have confidence in staff to go through and diligently check that. But it was quite an undertaking, and so thank you. The one question that I certainly am having raised in the community is how this might affect the assessed value of land. And so I am wondering how or when that discussion might arise at public meetings, and if that would be led by our financial department, or if that would be led by perhaps invited guests from BC Tax Assessment. I realize it's not directly related to building and planning, but there are a lot of members of the community that they don't understand how all of these changes might perhaps affect their property, their individual property.
I'll take it as a comment. I might make a suggestion on that. It is a question that will come up. And as we have informational pieces around these changes, I know we have work still ongoing on the website and so forth, that maybe if it would be possible to include some like those kind of questions in our FAQs, so if people are curious about it, we could just reach out to BC Assessment and see what they have to say. I know the intention is to, because it's broad-based, to not have any sort of point impact. But if we could provide some of that information on that kind of format, it might be an effective way of doing it as opposed to a presentation to council. Because there's really information and we don't have no control over it. It's just, you know, some predictions on those sort of pieces. But maybe that was that, Mr. Bull.
Yeah, up to you, Mayor. I'm trying to think what the answer might be. I think it's probably even for BC Assessment. They will have to look at what happens in the real estate market, right? Because there's a couple of things happening. On the one hand, the whole infill housing program and the provincial program increases housing density, but it does it across the whole province. So does it really make a difference in that matter? And the other thing that I think another maybe good something to realize for any resident with concerns, it still comes down to the value of improvements on the land. So it comes down to buildings and structures, and less, I think, what the number of units is inside the building, because it seems that's what the BC Assessment is usually focusing on. If they come in to see plans for building, it's about, well, how much floor area has been built. But I'm definitely not an expert on this, so a topic that if we have a chance, maybe in the future, we can get some more information on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Don't see other hands. Just, I have a very quick question on, it's really a follow-up to Councillor Smart's questions. It's just, I think for anybody following this process and the mad dash to get all these bylaws changed and the efforts made to kind of run through scenarios to see what that would look like, I think we're all aware that we're approving this without knowing all of the consequences. So I guess just curious about how, you know, sort of the what if scenario. What if, you know, 3 weeks from now we have a couple of applications that highlight, oh, this actually doesn't work very well, or we have existing houses that some wording changes has made all the houses legal non-conforming and having to go through variance processes or something that just isn't just one of those things. And maybe if staff can give us any sense of like how would we be able to react to those kind of things? What's the mechanism to come back and consider any other changes to kind of address the sort of the maybe minor, maybe major. I think we probably captured most of the fee fallout, but it was a process that was really time constricted, and it limited some of the scenario tests. So I'm curious in that environment, like where these things arise. Mr. Bull?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Definitely something we're going to keep an eye on as well, and hearing from people and their questions, we're going to find out pretty quick if there are things that come up frequently, maybe around garages, as Councillor Smart was asking, or other provisions that we're not aware of that create questions for designers, perhaps. If there are topics that need to be addressed sooner rather than later, we would definitely take the initiative to bring back something in short order. But also, as we discussed earlier, there's going to be an update report later this year, so it also gives us a chance to maybe brief council on any less urgent matters that have come up, but might give pause for some reflection and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, we're back to the main piece here for 9.1.
Move receipt.
This is receipt of the report. So we should debate that. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And I'll move that council give second reading as amended to zoning amendment bylaw number 4871/2024.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And I move that.
I had my hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Mayor Murdoch.
Sorry, Councillor Smart. My apologies. I saw the hand. I was going to remind you to lower your hand. Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak to the bylaw that we're passing now, just with a comment. And I know that this time frame has been really challenging, but I do hope that in the near future, prior to 2025, we can address some of the opportunities of a more fulsome infill housing program. I am concerned that we are not yet meeting the needs that I've heard from residents with regards to simple additions, garage renovations, and houseplexes. And there are some easy things I feel that we could do to really make applications smoother for our residents with regards to rear yard setbacks and really looking at those laneway suites and corner lots. So I just wanted to say I will, of course, be supporting this. We need to get this moving, but there's so much more opportunity ahead of us to support our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. And I would say too, I do encourage if people are, see areas that are not working to reach out to staff and let them know, or if they have ideas or thoughts to do that. You can also send it to the OB Council at oakbay.ca, which actually goes into a triaging model. If it's operational, it gets sent to staff to look at and get shared with council for information. Those are all tools that you can send and share ideas and information that can also be used. So we are here to make it right, not to be stuck in what we're doing here today.
So I'll move that council give third reading.
Oh, sorry, I did call the question, but I didn't recognize the hand up, so I'm just going to declare I didn't actually capture that, so I wanted to capture the comment first. So having heard that, I'm going to call the question on second reading at this point as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That does carry.
For the third time, I move that council give third reading to zoning amendment bylaw number 4871/2024.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. I thought we should debate on the third reading. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 4871/2024 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We have newly established bylaws for residential zones. We hope we had it reasonably right, and we are going to be seeing how that plays out over the next few months. But certainly I think it's close, as it keeps many of the same pieces in place with some encouragement for some of the other densities. Intimately related to this is 9.2. We did the first three readings at the last meeting, which is our parking facilities amendment bylaw. I don't know we need much of an introduction. Mr. Bull?
Thank you, Mayor. The bylaws in front of you, unchanged from before, so no comments on the part of staff. Thank you.
So I'll move that Parking Facilities Amendment Bylaw number 4873/2024 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. We don't usually debate on adoption, but I will leave a second here in case anybody wishes to jump in. Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We move to item number 10.1. This is the 2024 Parks, Recreation and Culture fees and charges. This is open for public input on the fees and charges. Mr. Meikle, you've been here all evening waiting to say your piece. We appreciate you being able to answer some of these questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Council. Yes, this is our annual presentation of our fees and charges for Parks, Recreation and Culture. Mind you, these are our fees specifically for admissions, so general admissions to the facilities, which is includes our more commonly termed as our drop-in activities, swimming, skating, fitness activities, and there's a number of sports and other physical fitness activities that go along with those drop-in fees. As well, it is our rental rates for use of facility spaces and items that may come with those facility spaces, TVs, etc. So not a great deal of changes in the definitions and wording of the previous bylaw. One sort of the largest change is just reflecting common language, excuse me, common language that is used instead of what we often is called a 10 times punch pass. We've been receiving feedback that the term punch pass is not in favor, so we're looking at it being called a visit pass. Otherwise, the major ones would be overall, we're proposing a 4% increase in fees, and that's in general. You'll note some are probably plus or minus 1% of 4%, given some rounding. We're rounding to the nearest quarter generally. So that 4% has been applied to all the charts that you see attached to this bylaw amendment. And the other major one, we are proposing an elimination of the administration fee for pass cancellations. We've actually heard from a number of customers that that's one of the barriers to purchasing a longer term pass for many of those individuals who travel, although we do have some options for them to put their pass on hold, etc. People just feel in some cases they'd prefer to stop their pass, not have to pay that cancellation fee, and then restart when they return. So we've taken that feedback into consideration. And otherwise, that's is the majority of changes. One correction in our golf fees from the last year's bylaw amendment. We just had an error in terms of the seasons passes for adult 60 plus and student rates. People have been charged the correct rates, but unfortunately in the bylaw last year it was an incorrect rate. And then we've also presented with you a picture of, we just chose to look at the single admission fees and the annual pass fees around the region to give you a picture of what's there. I will also note that the Parks, Rec and Culture Department is currently still in the process of working with external consultants on an economic analysis. We've gone through a few draft processes. We're just in the final draft process. The 4% increase is supported in that draft process, but we'll really be bringing that full economic analysis before council. We're aiming for September, early October, so it'll feed into the next budget process. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Meikle. Mr. Meikle, I was looking at the annual pass fees and noticing that ours is actually quite a bit less than certain other municipalities, and we do have some good, obviously some very good recreational facilities. I understand why Saanich might be a bit more, but it's almost $100 more a year, but they do have quite a number of facilities. But the West Shore and Victoria, I'm actually quite surprised that ours is that much lower than theirs. Just if you want to comment on that.
Could have turned into a question there at the end. Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Braithwaite. Yeah, I mean, Saanich is likely based on the number of facilities they have in total. That one's fairly straightforward. I don't have a great deal of explanation for differences in passes between, especially West Shore and Victoria. And in comparison, it is probably historic in where things were set originally. We will be coming back with, I think one of the things found through the economic analysis, and not to speak too early on that, is a need to make some adjustments in our timed passes and how that, it all should sort of fall back to your base rate, your single admission rate. We're off a little bit on a couple of those, so you'll see some amendments, some adjustments in next year's budget and next year's process here.
Just one more question through you, Mayor. Also, I had someone ask me about this, and just to get it clarified in open council, that the annual pass holder for golf, for someone who wants to do golf, they pay a much reduced amount if they're already an annual pass holder for the recreation facility, correct?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Council. Yes, that is correct. It is in the Schedule 1 under green fees. I believe it's the very bottom piece under green fees on page 8 of 10 or page 4 of the bylaw amendment. It does say annual pass holder add-on, it's called. So if you are an annual pass holder, to get a golf pass is quite a good deal.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Watson.
Thank you very much. And this is through you, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle. Just a quick question about the elimination. Oh, actually, two questions about the elimination of the admin fee for the annual pass refund. Does that mean that going forward, if somebody is going to do this, it'll be if we approve this schedule, that it would be entirely pro rata? So if they come to you on day 222 of the year, they'll get, I can't do the math, but 100 and whatever, 41 days or 44 days. Okay. And so thank you. And then I'm just curious, when you said that, you get, clearly you get feedback all the time from users, how would you pick up that particular feedback from your users about making that kind of adjustment and to turn it into a business decision?
Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Watson. We have a couple of methods. So one is, of course, that we have a large face-to-face component of our business with members, and we ask our reception staff to take notes, keep track of, report out to our supervisor, our reception supervisory staff on those exact kind of comments. So we keep kind of a, I guess you could say, anecdotal log of what we hear from patrons. We also have a process, both handwritten comment cards as well as there's an online submission of a customer comment feedback form that can be done online. So we collect through those, and then direct emails to staff are ways we tend to collect that information from individuals at this point.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question to that, asking any other hands, Mr. Meikle, and that is, just curious if that administrative, because there is a cost, there's a deep discount for long passes, and then there's a cost for just handling those changes. So what was the previous piece? Was it a fixed dollar amount that you would charge, or how did that work as a quote-unquote penalty?
Thank you, Your Worship. It was a fixed fee of $25. I'm not 100% certain on the history there, although I know it was much more prevalent throughout the region. Most other places, I believe, have also dropped their admin cancellation fee, is my understanding. And I think in the original case was you'd also go back to where we were probably a little less technologically savvy and didn't even have scanners, for example, in some of our, with those passes we have now. So there was actually physically more administrative work to be done to cancel a pass and change a pass, etc. Whereas now it really isn't that much of a time constraint or time capacity issue for staff.
Okay, thank you for that. It seems like there should be some, even if it's not a fee, but just you get 90% of the remaining back instead of 100% of the remaining back. Something that gives a little bit of a, I don't know. That just seems wrong to be giving deep discounts for committing and then basically allowing that to be kind of reused over and over again as needed. But I take the direction of staff on that one. I don't think go ahead, Mr. Meikle, sorry.
Thank you. For us, it's really about the longevity or the long-term relationship you're creating with those members. And so what we felt is, and I think what most other places have encountered is those people are coming back, and that's certainly our hope for the future. And we're keeping them as members year on year.
Thank you. And my only other comment on this is it's a hell of a deal. And I think sometimes we talk about these things in terms of the increment over the previous year and other aspects, but, you know, I look at the annual pass for everything, for all admissions, the swimming and work into the gym and everything else, and it's about 6 weeks worth of a private, like just going to just a gym, nothing else in the private industry. We're just unbelievably inexpensive by comparison to so many other options out there for people. So I think it's good to remember that and trumpet it from the things, because I think sometimes people get upset about small amounts of money when you look at the overall thing. It's so heavily subsidized and so affordable for everybody. And also just a reminder to anybody who is watching, which is probably nobody at this point, that there are, of course, there are mechanisms by which if people feel they cannot afford these services, that there are additional discounts or even free passes available in those scenarios. So I think it's worth just noting that all the time. Okay, thank you. For letting me
Move
ramble.
receipt.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. There's nobody in the room left anymore, and I see no public online. But I do have to ask the question: is there anybody who wishes to speak to the matter from the public? I don't know how you would speak to it, but in case you're lingering in the hallway or something. Not seeing anybody, we'll come back and perhaps I can get motions for the readings.
I'll move that council give first and second reading to Parks, Recreation and Culture fees and changes amendment bylaw number 4876/2024.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? I realize I didn't let people talk to it, but I'll do that on the third reading. Go ahead.
And I move that council give third reading to Parks, Recreation and Culture fees and charges amendment bylaw number 4876/2024.
Moved and seconded. Does anybody wish to make any comments or debate on this matter before I call the question? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That'll come back for adoption at the next meeting. Is there any new business from members of council? Then look for a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Moved and second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, Councillor Smart, for joining us this evening. Go back to your family. We'll see you later on. And thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Don't tell anybody.